රෝස සුවඳ තවත් තිකු කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන නව සන්ලයිට් රෝස්.
Tonight, price of frivolity. A raft of new restrictions to come into effect from midnight as the WHO even calls for a curfew. First target. The vaccination drive reaches the over 30s target immunisation goal. GSP Plus in focus. No direct correlation between Sri Lanka's GSP Plus facility and the EU resolution.
The recent resolution was non-legislative in nature. Therefore, it is non-obligatory.
And even the EU will enjoy benefits from the facility's status quo.
If we lose GSP Plus prices from Sri Lanka, either the raw material prices decrease or the export prices will increase there. In this pandemic situation, I think it's not the correct decision for all.
All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Friday, the 13th of August, 2021.
කට උත්තර නැති වෙන්න කලින් සිග්නල් ඩීප් ක්ලීන් එකකට මාරු වෙන්න.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammik Eknaik. Now then, the task force on the prevention of COVID-19 decided to impose a raft of travel restrictions with effect from midnight. Interprovincial travel restrictions will once more come into effect, and restrictions will be imposed on certain non-essential services. Certain selected sectors, however, will be given the opportunity to cross borders.
The task force on the prevention of the spread of COVID-19 convened under the patronage of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the Presidential Secretariat this morning. Chief of the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavindra Silva announced today that during the meeting it was decided to enforce interprovincial travel restrictions from midnight today. He said that only those in the banking, agricultural, apparel and tourism sectors, as well as those engaged in essential services, including healthcare, ports and airports, will be allowed to travel between provinces. The heads of private and public sector institutions have the authority to recall employees living outside of the relevant province. The employees of the private sector should be called to work while adhering to the health guidelines while considering the space at the place of work. Army Commander General Shavindra Silva further said that from the 15th of September onwards, it will become mandatory for all persons visiting public areas to carry their vaccine cards with them, confirming that they are fully vaccinated. He added that the health guidelines given by authorities will have to be strictly followed at supermarkets, shops, shopping malls and restaurants, etc. In the meantime, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has informed the health officials to pay special attention to people above the age of 60 suffering from chronic non-communicable diseases. The president had given these instructions after taking into account the studies that showed a majority of the deaths reported from the Western province to have been within this high-risk group. He urged the priority to be given to this high-risk group when conducting PCR and rapid antigen tests and pointed out the need to isolate the patients who have undergone kidney transplants and those who are receiving dialysis. The need to obtain information on the patients registered at the clinics in hospitals to receive treatment for non-communicable diseases and bringing them to the special attention of medical officers of health and public health inspectors were also discussed. Head of the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavindra Silva, meanwhile had said that measures have been taken to vaccinate over 60s in the Western province who have not received at least one vaccine dose so far. However, medical specialists pointed out that receiving just one dose is not enough to be safe against the virus, and added that people should act in a responsible manner after receiving both doses until the immunization period is reached. Speaking further, the medical specialists emphasized that it was the duty and responsibility of the people to prevent mass gatherings, to stay at home unless they are called for essential services and duties, and to help prevent the spread of the disease by adhering to the health guidelines.
The government's target of vaccinating the population above the age of 30 by September has seen completion well ahead of the target date, albeit on paper. The target was 11.4 million, and by last evening, over 11.6 million people had been given at least the first dose of any COVID vaccine available in Sri Lanka. The Ministry of Health says that they will continue vaccinations even though the target population has been vaccinated, especially since there are some who still haven't obtained the vaccine.
As Sri Lanka's COVID situation continues to worsen, health officials continue to remind the people that the best way of curtailing the spread of the virus is through vaccination and adherence to health and safety guidelines. The government's main target population for vaccination in the country is over 30s, which is estimated to be around 11.4 million. The target was to administer at least the first dose to them by September. By last evening, that number had been surpassed. According to figures released by the Epidemiology Unit, 11,672,082 people had been immunized with the first dose of any vaccine rolled out in the country. From the figure, 4,017,085 people are now fully vaccinated.
අඩු අයගෙනුත් යම් ප්‍රමාණයකට දීපු ඒවා මේ ගොඩේ සමහර විට තියෙන්න පුළුවන් අපිට ඒවා තවම නිවැරදි කරලා ඒක වෙන වෙනම කිරීම කාලය ගත වෙන දෙයක් මේ සියල්ලත් මෙතෙන්ට එකතු වෙනවා ඒ වගේම තමයි ගම්පහ කොළඹ වාගේ බස්නාහිර පළාතේ දිස්ත්‍රික්ක ගත්තාම ඒවායේ తాවකාලික ජනගහනයක් ඉන්නවා සමහර දිස්ත්‍රික්කවල ඉන්න අය මේ දිස්ත්‍රික්කවලට ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නවා ඉතින් මේ සියල්ල නිසා අපේ අස්තමේන්තු ජනගහනය ඉක්මවලා අපි මේ එන්නත් ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා තවත් ලබා දෙන්න අය ඉන්නවා ඒ කියන්නේ තමන්නාසලට තේරෙනවා ඇති බොහෝ දිස්ත්‍රික්කවල මේ වෙනකොට 100% ඉක්මවලා එන්නත් ලබා දුන්නත් තවත් එන්නත ලබා ගන්න නැති අයත් අපිට ඒ නිසා අපි 100 ඉක්මවා කියලා අපි එතනින් නවතින්න නැතුව නොකඩවා අපි එන්නත් ලබා දීම කරගෙන යනවා අවසානයේදී සමස්තයක් හැටියට මේ රටේ ලැබිය යුතු සීල දෙනාටම එන්නත ලබා දීමටයි කටයුතු කරන්නේ.
By the end of last evening, 334,020 people had been vaccinated during the day with both the first and second doses of the jabs currently rolled out in the country. 31,041 first doses of the Covishield vaccine were administered yesterday, while 955 of its second dose were also rolled out. Yesterday also saw the rollout of 76,694 Sinopharm first doses, while 217,962 people were recipients of the China-manufactured vaccine's second dose. The first and second doses of the Pfizer vaccine were also used to inoculate people yesterday. In the meantime, consultant physician at the Colombo National Hospital, Dr. Upul Disanayake, clarified the unpopular notion that a person will contract the virus by coming into contact with a surface which had been in contact with a virus-infected person.
The only practical way that virus goes is through your nose and mouth and rarely through your eyes. So touching a surface with your hand will not infect you. And touching a surface which a person has used is not going to infect you. There is an idea if you touch a surface, some airborne virus particle which has precipitated on a surface, and unfortunately if you touch your eyes with this or the mouth with the thing, you might infect yourself. But if you wash your hand, you can't get the virus. Those polythenes in front of these shops and even the hospitals where the nurses cubicle and polythene, that will increase the risk of infection within that. But what happens if there's a free airflow through the room, the virus will not remain there. It will be carried off. So the best place to be is outdoors.
In the meantime, the country's daily COVID infections surpassed the 3,000 mark for the first time yesterday since the 5th of June. The Epidemiology Unit placed the daily caseload at 3,039. The Western Province accounted for almost half of the new cases with 1,483. 591 were confirmed from Gampha, 455 from Colombo and 437 from Kalutara. Further, 46 imported cases were also among yesterday's tally. Meanwhile, the number of COVID-related deaths are also on the rise as the island confirmed its highest single-day deaths with 156 yesterday. This raises the overall number of COVID victims reported in the country to 5,620. The daily spike in COVID deaths have even exceeded the capacity of hospital morgues. Meanwhile, Dr. Hemantha Herath then commented on the reason as to why there is a delay in releasing the remains of the COVID deceased.
You cannot dispose them quickly just because the deaths are increasing, because they have to follow the most common thing is once a death occurs, most of the time if it is a COVID death, COVID positive, the next of kins or the close relatives being quarantined, and as a result they are unable to proceed with the clearance of the dead body, basically because somebody will have to come and identify and provide the consent to proceed. These are very, very practical and occasionally happening, and that will be rectified as and when it happens.
In other developments, the country's overall recoveries rose by 2,173 to 304,628 today. there have also been 2,382 fresh infections confirmed in the island so far today, taking the number of active cases to 34,870.
In the meantime, the World Health Organization has drafted a host of recommendations pertaining to Sri Lanka's COVID-19 situation, which even includes the imposition of curfew. They also call for a 4-week strict travel restricted period, which they say will save thousands of lives and bring the daily caseload down to around 1,000.
The World Health Organization has given their observations and recommendations on Sri Lanka's COVID situation following the 5th Independent Expert Group meeting. The experts say that the current trends seen in the island indicate that Sri Lanka could soon face a crisis of unprecedented proportions. While noting that recent hike in the number of deaths, the report says that bed occupancy rates at all levels of healthcare facilities, over 85%, and ICUs, over 90%, have increased progressively and is now in full capacity. Patients dependent on oxygen have significantly increased from 528 last week to 646 patients by Tuesday, the 10th of this week. It warns that there is an inevitability of serious shortage of oxygen supply and interruption of care if the trend continues. What's more, many areas of the country show a high PCR test positivity rate of over 20%. The report also says that as of the 31st of July, more than 60% of sequence samples are Delta variant, which is highly transmissible with shorter incubation period. Amidst the situation, it says that there is sustained high level of mobility and social mixing among population despite the nationwide restrictions. The report also projects that at current levels of mobility restrictions, the number of cases would increase up to 6,000 a day by mid-September, and the daily deaths would peak around 220 per day by early October. ICU admission is expected to peak at around 275 by early October, with cumulative deaths around 30,000 by January next year. The report, however, stresses that the projections are an underestimate. The experts are clearly partial towards what they called increased levels of stringency, the likes of which were witnessed in May to June 2021 this year. They say that 4 weeks of it would see the daily cases fall to around 1,000, daily deaths to dip under 25, and people needing ICU care to be less than 25 a day by October. This, they say, will avert 18,000 deaths by January 2022. Thus, the experts are calling for an immediate increase in the level of stringency for 4 weeks. The report notes that immediate actions are crucial and critical because it takes a few weeks before measures show a positive impact on the number of infections and hospital admissions. It further calls for strict enforcement of movement restrictions, including inter-district travel, except for essential services, noting that the effective implementation of these measures may require the enforcement of a curfew for a short period in large geographic areas or nationally. The experts also recommend the restriction or cancellation of all public events for 3 weeks. Provision of care and protection of the health workers and augmenting a staff in hospitals to minimize disruption of essential health services is another recommendation. The report also calls for the development and implementation of an effective communication plan to engage the public and update them on the control measures. Finally, the WHO group recommends to prioritize the over 60s and those with comorbidities in vaccination, preferably with the Pfizer, Moderna or AstraZeneca, saying that even a single dose of these vaccines provided some degree of protection until the second dose is given. However, a local expert believes that persons with comorbidities should seize any opportunity to get any WHO-approved vaccine instead of prioritizing the jabs produced in Western countries.
There is no discrimination as such. Whatever the make of the vaccine, it is important to take the vaccine. I don't agree with that decision. Whatever the vaccine, there will be a transient period up to which the vaccine will not give any protection. This is due to the immune mechanism in the body. The lymphocytes take some time for the antibodies to produce. Regardless of the vaccine, there will be a period where the patient is not immune even immediately after vaccinating. So, message should go like this. We don't prefer any particular vaccine. Whatever vaccine which is approved by the WHO, which is being used in this country, should be given, and without any fear, hesitation, the patients and the families should take them.
We will see you after this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, Sri Lanka's ambassador to the European Union, Grace Asirivadam, assures that the GSP Plus concession granted to Sri Lanka will not be affected by the resolution adopted by the European Parliament in June this year. Addressing a webinar on the facility, she said that this resolution calling Sri Lanka to repeal its Prevention of Terrorism Act and inviting member states to withdraw Sri Lanka's access to GSP Plus is non-legislative in its nature. Meanwhile, also speaking there, the Seafood Exporters Association of Sri Lanka highlighted that a status quo on Sri Lanka's GSP Plus facility will be a win-win for both the European bloc and the island.
The GSP Plus is mainly affecting the tuna industry, with 70% going to the EU market. We find difficult to find alternative markets in this pandemic situation as well. So as an industry, I don't know, in this situation, I don't think we have any other markets available for the sort of fish products that we supply in the EU market. It will really affect the fishermen. They're right now going further and further to catch the fish. So the cost of fishing has gone up. So if there's a 14.5% duty, that will really affect the raw material price of what we can export. All our fishing methods are sustainable. We use a lot of artisanal fishing still, and we have geared our seafood market for niche products. If we lose GSP Plus, the prices from Sri Lanka, either the raw material price has decreased or the export prices will increase there. As a whole, I think EU will lose out because right now countries like Vietnam, India have gone into shutdowns and food supply is short. So in this pandemic situation, I think it's not the correct decision for all.
On the 10th of June, the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling for the repeal of Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act and inviting the European Union countries to consider a temporary withdrawal of the GSP Plus facility from Sri Lanka. Speaking at the webinar, Sri Lankan ambassador to the EU, Grace Asirivadam, noted that the resolution will not have a direct bearing on Sri Lanka retaining the facility.
The Commission has shared its views on the draft resolution before it was adopted. The Commission was also concerned about certain issues mentioned in the resolution and said that the issue will remain at the heart of the Commission's engagement with Sri Lanka in the framework of the GSP Plus monitoring. So the Commission, which is responsible by powers delegated to it under the GSP regulation for all matters related to GSP regime with obligation of reporting to the Council and European Parliament, will take care of this resolution. And the Commission will assess the progress in implementation of GSP Plus obligation by Sri Lanka through the GSP Plus mechanism, such as the monitoring mission. So the recent resolution was non-legislative in nature. Therefore, it is non-obligatory. However, the resolution will put pressure on the Council President and the Commission to focus on the contents of the resolution. Yet, as per the GSP regulation, for the purposes of monitoring and withdrawal procedures or withdrawal preferences, in addition to the report of the monitoring mission, information received from other sources, including civil society, social partners, European Parliament and Council, could also be considered or used, provided that they are accurate and reliable. The Commission will also advise the government of Sri Lanka through the Working Group on Human Rights. We have a bilateral working group and also bilateral joint commission, and then they will send a monitoring mission. And according to the report of the monitoring mission, the Commission will engage in a dialogue with the government, providing sufficient time to improve the situation. If there are shortcomings and concerns, the report of the monitoring mission will be submitted to the GSP Plus working party. This is a council-appointed working party with recommendations of the Commission. So the Commission will make its own assessment on Sri Lanka. The resolution will be there, but based on the resolution, no action will be taken.
Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's former ambassador to the World Trade Organization, Dr. Derana Silva, elaborated on the importance of establishing business-friendly policies to attract more investors to the island.
Bangladesh is mainly a textile exporter more than the apparel exporter. When they are exporting, rules of origin, they have a more flexible rules of origin. What you call as LDC, they are going through what you call a single transformation. But our exporters, apparel exporters, they have to go through a double transformation. So there is a more flexibility. So they were able to accelerate the exports. And the other one is policy environment in Sri Lanka, in our own backyard, are more restrictive, not exporter friendly. The more you introduce anti-export bias policies, our companies will be less competitive. There was a question why EU investors are not coming to Sri Lanka. Obvious reason. If the trade facilitation environment are more rate restrictive, not investor friendly, they don't come. So does the Sri Lankan companies. We must learn from our own past. Second, we must learn from other successful nations.
Now, in other local stories, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, is calling on the Sri Lankan populace to hoist black flags at every household on the 21st of this month in protest of lack of justice over the Easter Sunday terror attacks and the approach adopted by the government pertaining to the relevant process. Addressing a media briefing today, he noted that plans are in motion to take the matter to the International Forum in search of justice, with a letter already sent to the Pope. He also expressed discontent about the reply from the Director Legal at the Presidential Secretariat to the Catholic Church in response to the letter it had sent last month expressing its lack of satisfaction about the lack of measures taken over the attacks.
The committee of ministers that have been appointed by the President to study this report and carry out the recommendations of the Presidential Commission. Now, this report of the ministers, we reject it because it is not fair. Presidential Commission with 5 members, 4 judges and 1 ex-secretary of the Ministry of Justice. People who are intelligent and who are knowledgeable in the law. They go through an exercise for more than 1 year and they give a report. Now, a committee of 6 ministers of the cabinet who are from one political orientation, therefore, who represent the government. There is no fairness in this group. So this group has been appointed to sit in judgment over the recommendations of the Presidential Commission and give instructions to the relevant people to implement these decisions according to a plan that the ministers themselves will devise. This whole exercise is unacceptable to us. It is not transparent. We don't know what is happening. And all this time, the CID is supposed to be investigating. The intelligence units are supposed to be investigating. And they have been always telling us, we will file action next month, and so on. But we are not sure whether a thorough investigation into all these other aspects also has been conducted by the CID because we don't know what is happening. We have been kept in the dark about this. And we are not sure whether justice will be meted out to us in this process because it's a political process. For example, we have insisted in that document that some of the top-level political figures like the former President Maithripala Sirisena and some of the top-level police officers who were in charge of intelligence and other factors, as indicated in the Presidential Commission report, recommended for prosecution, nothing has happened up to now. Because we feel that the government is protecting them for their own self-interest, for their political gain, which is not an acceptable procedure. A secret deal has been worked out by the government with these parties and party leaders and politicians and officials to keep this thing behind locked doors, which is not fair by the people who suffered these attacks. We want all the recommendations of the Presidential Commission implemented as soon as possible, and there cannot be any exceptions. If there are exceptions, then the President, who proclaimed publicly that he will bring one country, one rule, will have one country, two rules.
Then Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit moved to remind the contents of the report compiled by the Presidential Commission which probed the Easter Sunday terror attacks.
As the Presidential Commission report itself points out, the previous government's inaction, because during the time of the previous government, this extremist group spread out its tentacles to different places and they caused the attack on the Buddha statues in Mavanel. Similarly, they also were discovered to have had a training camp at Lacto Estate in Vanathavilluwa. These were discovered by the previous government before the attack, but no proper action was taken. The question is that when the Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's attitude is examined by the Commission says that he was soft on the Muslim extremism due to political posturing. So there is a responsibility on his part. Because it is one thing to solicit the support of a community of people who belong to a religion, but it is another thing to encourage and let violence happen at their hands. Similarly, it is also said in the report that the former president, when he was approached by some security personnel with the suggestion to arrest Sahran Hashim, he did not want to do that. He said, why put snakes inside your dress? And he avoided it. This way, the former government, in their inaction, in their not readiness to curtail terror activities of any group, they let this terrible massacre take place. Therefore, they are responsible.
His Eminence was also asked whether justice can be expected within a system of executive presidency.
If the head of state is a person who shows moral authority, not legal authority, then we don't have to think of a situation where the judicial system will be influenced by such a person. Unfortunately, in the history of this country, the presidential system of government has given the authority to one person. But presidential constitution presupposes that the president will be an honest person. But unfortunately, in the history of this country, after the presidential system was introduced, all the presidents have abused their authority, one way or the other.
Basically, what you're saying is the current president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, does not have the moral authority. He's also not a statesman. And that is one of the reasons you're seeing the deterioration of the situation in Sri Lanka at the moment.
No, I'm not saying that he is not a statesman. He has to be a statesman. Unfortunately, the way things are turning out looks like he is not giving proof of that to the public. If he is a statesman of that type, he must not appoint a ministers' committee to sit in judgment over the pick and choose the recommendations of the Presidential Commission.
We will see you shortly. Bear with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, the deficit in the trade account has widened on a year-on-year basis for the fourth consecutive month in June this year. Both exports and imports were significantly higher in June compared to the same month last year. Although exports recorded a healthy growth, I should say, in the first half of the year, import expenditure has increased at a higher pace.
The deficit in the trade account has widened on a year-on-year basis to $652 million in June 2021 compared to the deficit of $161 million recorded in June 2020. The cumulative deficit in the trade account in the first half of the year also widened to $4,316 million from $3,262 million recorded in the corresponding period in 2020 and $3,597 million recorded in the corresponding period in 2019. Terms of trade, meanwhile, deteriorated by 16.7% in June 2021 compared to June 2020 as the increase in import prices were higher than the increase of export prices compared to June 2020. In the meantime, earnings from merchandise exports in June this year recorded an increase of 12.6% to $1,007 million on a year-on-year basis. Cumulative export earnings from January to June 2021 amounted to $5,699 million compared to $4,413 million recorded in the corresponding period in the year 2020 and $5,999 million recorded in the corresponding period in 2019. Exports improved by 12.9% in June this year over May 2021. Earnings from the export of industrial goods meanwhile increased by 16.6% in June 2021 compared to June 2020, with a broad-based increase in export earnings under the most of the categories. Total earnings from industrial exports from January to June this year amounted to $4,408 million, with a growth of 31.3% from the same period in last year. In the meantime, total earnings from the export of agricultural goods in June 2021 remained around the same values recorded in June last year. Earnings from tea exports increased due to the improvement in export volumes while the export unit value declined. Total earnings from the agricultural exports during the first half of 2021 amounted to $1,259 million, with a growth of 21.2% from the same period last year. Meanwhile, expenditure on merchandise imports increased by 57.2% to $1,659 million compared to $1,055 million recorded in June 2020. The increase in import expenditure was observed across all main categories of the imports, namely consumer goods, intermediate goods and investment goods, although expenditure on petroleum imports was low import volumes during June this year. In intermediate goods, the expenditure on importation in June 2021 increased by 48.5% over June 2020 despite the 40% decline in the expenditure on fuel. Expenditure on fuel declined due to non-importation of crude oil and low import volumes of other types of petroleum, taking into consideration the availability of sufficient stocks.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.